G'day guys, it's Calvin from the Cartoon Company down under in New Zealand. So this one's going to be a little bit mixed up. Kind of goes with what I've been doing. Fairly big job. And we've swapped looms. But we'll come back to that in just a minute because I've got a couple other things to share. This year my workload has gone crazy. I've brought in someone else to help me out. There isn't a proper job title. Sometimes I call her my office lady. Sometimes I call her my administrator. But let's just call her Bronwyn because that's her real name. And some of you have probably already dealt with her. She's a little bit camera shy, but she did say the day she brings Big Red to work, I was allowed to video it. So here she is, coming to work in a supercharged V8 Hilux. It has featured in another video, but here's Bronwyn coming to work. Being in the business that I'm in, kind of specialised, it's really hard to find people who can complete the work and understand what I'm doing. And Bronwyn does an awesome job deciphering my doctor-like scribbles. And she often tells me I could have been a doctor. I kind of am, a doctor for one UZS. That brings me to my second point, that if you have someone who does a great job, say thank you. I get a lot of videos, a lot of little messages saying thanks, hey, and I really appreciate it. It's also important, I think, to acknowledge when you're being thanked. But we have one particular customer, I have been a little hard on him. He's Australian. There was an incident with the intake manifold possibly being back to front. He was having trouble with some studs. And I gave him a fair bit of shit for that. But ants, I will eventually forget about that. Maybe. But this particular man sent me this little box. Turned up from Australia. There was a 1UZ ECU in it. It's a nice, clean, tidy ECU. Early, LS400 or Celsior. I didn't actually check which one it was, but one of those. Some ignition rotors. They'll be handy. I'll use them. And as I don't actually drink chocolates, as you'll notice, it's empty. They were very, very tasty, and I did share them. So there's a second box though, which I possibly haven't shared yet. They look tasty too. So I'm glad I could help you out, ants, and it's great seeing your truck progress. And I think I'm going to have to give you a bit of a poke in the ribs to keep that motivation up, and it can be a bit tricky staying focused on these jobs. Now on to this particular job that I'm doing here. It's been a mammoth effort. I've edited up the first video and hopefully you guys have watched it. So we're going to talk about swapping looms from different engines. We're going to talk about the pitfalls of it. And I'm going to share a couple of tricks with regard to automatic transmissions. So there's a lot of information to get through. Oh, and it's the fitting instructions for Steve's loom. Right, back to the beginning. Let's turn the clock back a bit. Steve rang me, suggested he had a Crown engine ECU. He was trying to make it run. It wouldn't run. He eventually brought it down to me. We discussed it. And he brought this particular loom down to me. Early 131 Crown. 3 plugs in the front with a little fly lead coming out. So we made the decision not to use that. It was a little bit butchered. It wasn't too bad. But there were certainly issues in that. And no ECT. The little box that does the transmission control, because this one only does the engine. So the decision was made to swap to a 20 series Celsior loom. Let's have a look at one of those. So we swapped to a loom that looked like this. Different engine plugs, different coverings, different transmission plugs, and really to make it fun, I thought I'd swap in a 151 Crown ECU, smaller, and it's what I use in a lot of my own jobs. No hydraulic fan, I like that unit. So we have an early model Gen 1 engine, and we're swapping to a Gen 2 loom. And that in itself gives a whole lot of traps for people who don't know quite what they're doing. It doesn't just swap over. So let's work our way through some of the differences, and then I'll show you what I've done on this loom, and I've got a little bit more testing to do. Lots coming. Transmission. Both, in our market, run an A341. This one, however, runs a slip joint. This one runs a donut, round flange with a donut on the back of it. The shifter plug is different, small and big. Solenoid plug, we have an 8-pin and we have a 6-pin. The extra 2 wires being the temperature sensor for the transmission oil. We have a single rear speed sensor. This one has 2 speed sensors and they're dramatically different. We're going to cover that more. Let's have a look at those. So the Crown, like some of the other Gen 1 cars, run 2 speed sensors at the back. One of them directly to the ECU, and the other one goes up to the dash, signal's modified, runs the speedo, comes back to the engine ECU. Gen 2, and this is why I chose a Gen 2, has a single one at the back, single 2-wire sensor that only goes to the engine ECU. The engine ECU then has an output for the speedo, which can be used in some situations. And I used that on the tractor actually. I set up the tractor speedo recently directly from the engine ECU. So this one has like a normal speedo drive going into the transmission. And Steve wanted to run a cable speedo. So by deleting that one, it means that we can use a normal cable. So there's a problem solved. However, this one has 3 wires, this one has 2 wires. And to make life interesting, inside the box, this one has a 4-pulse trigger wheel, and this one has 32. So I've got to drop that by 8. So I've got to get it to recognise it and to drop it down. Now I did do some testing on speed sensors recently, and I may or may not put it in this video, just thinking about it. We're just going with the flow here, making stuff up as we go along a little bit. Not the information, the way the video is coming out. So that's the Crown one. And to really make it fun, guess what they did? Different heights. So the penetration, or the distance it goes into the speed sensor, is different. So if we went to swap to this one, which is like plan C, D or E, somewhere there, it would need to be spaced out. Still an option. We'll come back to that. Speed sensors coming back. Other differences in the looms. Oxygen sensors. The Crown runs a 2-wire. I don't actually know what I dropped in. The Crown 131 runs a single wire, and the Gen 2 runs a 4-wire. Fortunately, Steve had bought some sensors. They happened to be 4 wires. He had some single wire ones as well, so we were covered there. These are a Chinese sensor. They plugged in a little funny. But we'll put them in, we'll see how it runs. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it's going to work. Right, next difference. Front of the loom. The crown runs a 2-pin. Of course, these are the plugs I'm referring to on the front of the loom. 6-pin, which is common to all of them, but the non-hydraulic fan engines, so LS400s and some crowns, have a 2-pin there. And right by these plugs, I've put this plug here for a fan switch, so that controls the fan relay. And these ones, listed as spares. So those 4 there can be used for other things, and they come back to this dash plug over here marked spare. I did join 2 together because I did have 4 wires and 3 holes. So they can be used for things such as oil pressure if needed, air conditioning, or anything you need to get from here back inside the cabin. At this point I've left this big rubber grommet on it. I don't know, if it bends like that, is it? I don't know. It's got to go through an oval hole. Steve will sort that. Scissors or bending or cutting or something. And the Gen 2 loom runs a 4-pin because it originally had a hydraulic fan. Even though I've swapped to an ECU that doesn't run a hydraulic fan, it runs a viscous fan. So that's okay. New plug, problem solved. So that was nice and simple. The way the looms bolt on the engine are different because the fuel rails are different. Crown loom has plastic coverings, and a plastic piece across the back. A big plug going onto the knock sensor loom. That is different to the Celsior, which runs a smaller cover over the back, small plastic down the TPS side, and conduit down the left hand side. So I swapped it. So here is the solution. I've swapped to Gen 1, I rated another loom. So on both sides it now has Gen 1 plastics, and along the back it has a Gen 1 piece of plastic. And that worked out really well for me. I've got a video coming of a refab I did on an LS400, and the wiring loom needed new plastics. So the donor loom for this job had the plastics removed, fixed an LS400, and I had a cut loom. Because as you can see, I've still got Steve's loom intact. I had a totally cut loom, which I've harvested some plastics off. That's probably why I don't throw anything away, because in a job like this, I needed some plastics. So that was really handy. That solved that problem. Igniters were different. Don't worry, I had spares, so we did an exchange there. Injectors were different. The crown runs a smaller 215cc purple injector. The Celsior, or this later crown, 151 crown, runs a blue, dark blue, 250cc injector. It's okay. Old Yellow's losing some injectors this time, and they're going up to Steve. It's just had new seals put on it, so they can just pop out. And they're tested with this loom, so I know they're going to work. Does mean I'm getting low on the blue injectors. So what do we've got? We've got igniters different, injectors different, plastics on the loom different, ECU different, gold start injector. Reminds me, I've got to get a bolt and a frost plug so Steve can block off his cold start. Ta-da! I think it's a 19mm. No, it's 3/4. For you guys in the US. Happens to be pretty much the same size, so that's fine. And an 8x1 bolt. Steve will cut it down. There's a washer on it. That'll block up the fuel rail. I just actually had to repair another vehicle, and I know I put the parts into the kit. The mechanic didn't block off the cold start. They'd lost the bolt, put the wrong thread into it, but I got it sorted. But that mechanic also managed to feed the idle air control into the engine breather. Closed circuit. Not so good. Steve's box. Not actually his own box. Steve's a guy, doesn't have a box. Right, other reasons for using Gen 2. Now this is something that annoys the crap out of me. Can anyone tell me what this is? And I'm going to do a video on this. Just on this at some stage. It's possibly going to contain some foul language. It's not a talk about chickens. This is a kickdown switch. That is a kickdown switch. This is a transmission. This is a cable. Goes up to the throttle body. What is this cable? And I'll tell you what this cable is. It's not a bloody kickdown cable. When this is referred to as the kickdown cable, it annoys the crap out of me because it's not a bloody kickdown cable. Now, did you get that? Not a kickdown cable. The early ECUs have a kickdown switch under the accelerator pedal. Have guys ever wondered why the kickdown on their converted vehicles is lazy when they're using a Gen 1 ECU? Did you fit a kickdown switch? Probably not. The kickdown on a 1UZ transmission is electronic. It's an electronic gearbox. Transmission. It's an electronic transmission. It's an electronic tranny. Though a tranny over here is something very different. And the early ones, because the TPS often doesn't span to 100%, you often only get like 80. At about 75%, touch on this kickdown switch. I've got a factory sawer sitting out there, so I will be talking about that switch. But the advantage of the Gen 2 ECU is they don't run that. They've got better mapping in the ECU for the transmission, better logic, better switch logic. They shift better, they work better. No need for the kickdown switch, because it's not a bloody kickdown cable. So let's go over this loom and I'll show you what I've done to convert it all over to make a Gen 1 engine run on the Gen 2 ECU and loom. I actually chose to use the factory 26 pin plug right there, so I thought that was pretty cool. And this part of the loom goes to the fuse box and relays, and then that can just unplug. This extra plug goes out to a Dakota digital speed unit, and that's going to help us with that speed sensor issue. I have a diagnostic plug right here going to the semicircle, which is normally under the dash. There's your 6-pin transmission plug, so that'll plug into the transmission. And there, tucked in here is a resistor for the temp sensor for the oil temp. So the ECU thinks that it's got oil temp and will change gear correctly. We swap back to the early shifter plug, and I've just got the start inhibit circuit bridged at the moment to check that all works. And here we have a plug that's got a whole lot of other stuff happening. We had a little discussion about shifter units. he's using an Altezza shifter, which is a lot like this one, but a little bit different in the pinout. So no overdrive switch as such, he'll just use the D4 circuit. So I've put an extra little loom to run off to the shifter. So this plug plugs into the shifter, and I don't have the pinout for the power switch, so he'll sort that as well. Over in this plug, BK, that is the brake switch. So it comes with a 12 volt signal from the brakes, from the brake light switch. So when you put your foot on the brakes, that wire will get 12 volts. Having a brake input ensures the transmission shifts into first gear when you come to a stop. Wire it right and they work properly. We have a fuel pump. You'll see I've tucked into the fuel pump wiring and a fan output. Normally a Crown would run this filter housing up under here, but Steve's remoted it. So I've added this wire here, that wire there for oil, and it pops out next to the ECU, funnily enough, on the wire that says oil. There's a tacho output. This vehicle doesn't even have a tacho. It's an American motor company, AMC Spirit. So no tacho. Check engine light. I don't think it's probably got one of those either. H2O, water temp. And that comes from this sensor over here, the single wire, which funnily enough is different in the plug on a Gen 1 and a Gen 2. Alternator light. So the alternator has been wired into this loom. Oh, let's have a look at that. So what I did here is coming through the back loom, I put some alternator wiring. It comes down, runs along here, and funny enough, it could also run along here if wanted, and then drop down the top, because this distance here is the same as this distance there. Yeah, right, good. This distance there is the same. It's got a round plug on it. I just happen to have an adapter to an oval plug or a rectangle plug because I'm running that alternator there. And then a main alternator line comes back through here, and I've made it a little bit longer, and it goes to this fuse box. There's also this cable here which will be supplied, which is for the starter motor. Steve has already let me know that he's got a wire running all the way through the vehicle to go towards the starter motor. So we need to come up with a solution for that. So I've given a meter of cable that can come inside the cabin, supplying an insulated stud, and that fuse block. The fuse block has voltage coming out into the relay box, and it has voltage coming out to the alternator, so it fuses the alternator. Somehow it needs to be joined in, and I think I've given enough parts that Steve can make it work. I trust Steve's got enough ability to do this, because you should see his headers. Gorgeous things. I showed them in the first video, and the overall job, lovely. So I'm quite confident that he's going to do that, and if he needs to annoy me, he will. And it doesn't really annoy me. I'd much rather my customers ring me, message me, have a chat, and ask me questions because they're not sure, than the mechanic that fitted my last loom that went down onto the high-ace van, who made a stuff up, came up, and they should have known that the idle air control doesn't go into the engine breather, but they switched their brains off when it was in a conversion. And that's a pity. So Steve, if you've got any questions, I know you're going to ask. That's what I'm here for. Right, we got to alternator wiring, main power cables, start loom. Yep, I've given you a new start loom as well. So that goes into the knock sensors and to the starter trigger, because of course it's different to your one. Alternator's covered. Oxygen sensors. We discussed the single wire and the 4-wire thing. However, they're not even in the stock position. Let's see if my wiring's long enough. So this one comes back, and I reckon it's more than a bell housing distance back, and a bit of distance on your oxygen sensor. I think that one's going to work. We're about 350 millimeters from the back of the engine there, so I think that's going to be okay. And then this one, probably not quite as far, but I think it's going to be enough. Steve has modified his throttle body, just like Old Yeller. I'm running a stock air intake on this one because I've also changed to the correct airflow meter, the later hot wire airflow meter, instead of the older alloy body airflow meter. Of course, that's the right plug as well. So we've got igniters are different, airflow meters are different. In the relay and fuse box, really simple. I've got a fair bit of distance. You can see it travels around there, works pretty good. Shall we make it go? I think we should make it go. To make the noise, really simple. We take the lead over here. On the end of the fuse box, it says ignition in. We clip ignition in, and things power up. If we were going to give it an alternator light, which is easy to do, I just have to give my test light ignition, and we chuck it in the back of the alternator light. Got an alternator light. Do the same with the check light. So ignition on the other side. There's a check light. And the check light's flashing a code at the moment because I've got my scan tool plugged in. I was checking everything worked. We're going to look at speed sensors in a moment. I think in a separate video. So here's our alternator light. And I grab my ignition switch, flick it across here, make sure you put it in park or neutral. I knocked it out with my finger. Where's that starter switch? Right beside the ignition is the start terminal. Quick change to a different ECU. I was getting a couple of codes. One of them was the throttle position sensor. Do you think this might cause a code? So we'll just plug that back in. And water temp sensor, I just went click and clicked that on properly. Of course, they were deliberate mistakes. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. Reset the ECU, unplug it, plug it back in. Constant flashing check light. So those two codes were gone. They came up as soon as I powered up the ECU. This one will also have sub-oxygen sensor codes. I don't care about them. They don't cause any running problems, no issues there. I'm reading the fault codes for the transmission. Scan tool tells me the lockup control solenoid is playing up. Accumulator control solenoid. Number 1 shift solenoid and number 2 shift solenoid. Might be because there's no gearbox attached. But it's good, it's reading codes. One more fire up and then into speed sensor testing. I've also swapped between ECUs. I have a rebuilt one, which is my preference, and I have a second hand one, which is cheaper. I'd prefer this one, then it's reliable and good. And one of the reasons I went away from the old Crown one is if that failed, we wouldn't be able to get a replacement. Kind of would prefer to put a rebuilt ECU into this job, then we know it's good. Serviced. Right, vroom vroom, vroom vroom. Woohoo! That sounds a heap better. Yeah. Probably should have worn earmuffs. That is going to make the AMC hammer. Yeah. I'm going to do some speed sensor testing. This one's long enough. We'll put it in another video. Yeah. We're done. Let's call it quits. You've seen me take looms off engines plenty of times. Remember the earths on the back, unplug, take off, put on the new one. We're good. So I hope that was helpful. Steve, any questions? You can ask me. Catch you soon.